Hello Rovers! Well, today's episode is another how-to episode, and in this one we're going to be building an easel for Mrs. Rover. Shh. It's for her birthday next week. Anyway, among other things, Mrs. Rover is quite a talented artist, and she's kind of mentioned to me a few times over the last little while how convenient it would be if she had an easel to do her art on. Now, this version of an easel, I've only seen one of them before, and it was only a glimpse I saw of it. Now, from that glimpse, I was able to reverse engineer it, if you will, just based on my experience as a builder and my knowledge of the materials I have at hand. Now, the only thing I had to buy, apart from the building materials, leftover building materials that I had on hand, were these two bolts and the washers and wing nuts. You know, came to a total of $2.50. So armed with that, and of course I made a sketch and a drawing and a cutting list, just like I always do for any project. And I've taken those, and we will be taking those right to the other side of this door where the workshop is located, and we're going to start building that. So what do you say? Let's crack on with this. All right, we're in the shop now, but before we get started, there are three things I must say. Number one, familiarize yourself with all the safety procedures and requirements of any tool that you're going to operate in your shop. Number two is make sure you create a drawing and a material list / cutting list before you start anything. Otherwise, you're just spinning your wheels, you're wasting your time, you're probably wasting resources. But number three, and this is probably the most important point I want to make today, is let's have some fun. Okay, so this project is a combination of two different materials, a bit of plywood and some regular 2x4s. We're going to deal with all the plywood first because when I cut plywood, I like to use a plywood cutting blade. So the first step is to create two triangles, and these are 12 inches by 12 inches, and then cut diagonally and you'll have two pieces. So in order to do that, I'm going to use the miter push, and it's quite easy to operate. So I'll put the wood on, and then I'll get it into position right there. I'll snug it up against the push, and then we're all set to go. Back it away from the blade, turn. All right, armed now with my hearing protection, we're going to turn the saw on. All right, so we have one triangle. Now we're going to cut the second. Now when it comes to cutting the second gusset, we can just use the fence for that. Now the next step is we need two pieces of plywood left over from what we started with, and they need to be 3.5 inches wide by 6 inches long. So I've set the saw to 6 inches. I'll push this piece of ply through, and then we'll turn it 90 degrees and we'll get our two other pieces. Okay, there we have two pieces that should be identical, and they are. Now I'm using 3/4 inch ply because that's what I have. It's left over, but you don't need to use anything near as thick as this. You could use 1/4 inch ply and you'd still be fine. You could use solid wood for a lot of these pieces. It's just that I have the ply, I'm going to use it. And secondly, I was able to push that through safely with my hand because my hand wasn't within this area where the throat plate is, and that's my safety concern. If you have to put your fingers in this area where the throat plate is, then use a push stick. All right, on to the next step. So in this next step, I need a piece of wood or a piece of plywood that's 9 inches wide and 40 inches long. It could be longer, it could be shorter. It's going to depend on what kind of art you want to mount, and that'll all become clear in the end. But for me, 9 inches wide is what I need to do right now. All right, in this step, we're going to remove this 1/2 inch section of the plywood. We're going to do it in 2 cuts. We'll make 1 cut along here, then we'll make a 2nd cut along here, and then we'll use a drill bit right down here, and that'll remove that piece of plywood for us. This slot has to be wide enough to take this bolt, which is 5/16, and the slot itself is 1/2 inch, so there's plenty of room there. All right, let's move on. Now we're finished with the table saw for now. Right now we need to drill a hole, so we're going to use our awl just to get ourselves started, to get it nice and centered. I'm using a 5/8 drill bit to cut this. I also have a sacrificial piece of wood underneath so I don't destroy my little workbench here. There we have our slot. Now you can clean that up a little bit with a file or a little piece of sandpaper. So that's it for all the plywood cutting. There wasn't very much, but there is a little bit of ripping to do on 2x material. When I say 2x material, we're talking 2x4s, 2x6s, 2x8s. So in my case, I had a 2x8. It was pine, and it was in really good shape, and it was for the build here, but it was so good I couldn't use it. I had to put it off to the side. I didn't have a purpose for it at that point, but I knew a nice piece of pine like that with very few knots in it would come in handy at some point, and it has. So I've cut it up into pieces for this project, and I've ripped a large section of it into 2x2s. Now, ripping is a procedure where we cut longitudinally on the 2x material. To do that, we have to change our blade to a ripping blade. I'm not going to show you how to change a blade because I did that in the last how-to video, which I'll indicate just up here if you want to see how you change a blade on a table saw. All right. Okay, so we're going to rip this piece in half. I have the blade set up to approximately 1/4 inch higher than the stock. I also have my push stick standing by, and I've made sure my cuffs are tidy. All right, the next step is to remove a little section of this 2x2, just like we see marked with the hash marks. Now I've set the blade up to 3/4 of an inch, and it's 3/4 of an inch out from the fence. Okay, so now we're going to do this cut right here. And to do that, I've set the blade height to 3/4 of an inch, and I've reset the fence so that it coordinates with this distance right here. The reason that I want to have the waste to the left of the blade is because if it were the other way around and to the right of the blade is spinning this direction toward me. And if that little piece of waste just gets jammed even a little bit between the saw blade and the fence, the saw blade is going to send it back like a projectile right at me. So by putting the waste off to the left, it's not going to get jammed. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now we're just about ready to start assembling. These first two pieces of plywood, I need to pre-drill them for screws. So I'm using my combination square to make this an easier job. The blade of the combination square is 1 inch wide, and I've set the combination square to 3/4 of an inch. So let's do that again. Now, armed with that, I bring it in and I gauge from the top and I mark 3/4 of an inch in. Then I take my awl and I make a small depression. There's 4 of them. And because I've made a sketch, I know where to make these holes. So I have this set, take my drill, and in case you're wondering, these are just scrap pieces of wood, and it's good to drill through the piece of wood you have into scrap to prevent tear out. So you can see there's virtually no tear out on the underside. So we'll do that again. Okay, now we're ready to start assembling. Now these two 2x2s, which we've ripped out of the 2x8, they need to run parallel to each other. And to ensure that that happens, I'm going to put these 2 little spacer bits on that we have just pre-drilled. Okay, we're flush, and then it just needs to maneuver a tiny bit this way. Okay, there we have it, our 1/2 inch slot with the entire length. Now we want to assemble this base piece onto our verticals. So I have pre-drilled 2 holes here. I've put a screw in already so that I can move this around. I've checked that it's square on this side and this side. We're looking really good, so now we can lock it in place by putting the second screw in. The next step is we want to put 2 more screws in, but these ones we want to send in at a bit of an angle, and the reason for that is we don't want to split the bottom of these 2 uprights. This is just softwood, this is pine, and it's going to crack if we put a screw too near the bottom. Okay, we have the base on. Now we put the gussets on. The next step is to attach the gusset to this piece right here, but we're going to pre-drill first. So I've already marked it. I'm going to use the awl. The reason for using the awl is to keep the bit from wandering when you try to drill the hole. Now we want to line this up so the bottom edge is totally flush, and this edge, the outboard edge, is also flush to the end of the 2x4. Well, now that we have these gussets attached to our structural piece, we can now attach them to the easel. So I've pre-drilled a number of holes to make this easy for myself. A 3-inch screw here, and 1.5 inches on these 3 holes. Nice and flush, just like the other side. Now, if you remember, earlier on we cut this little 5-inch piece of 2x4, and that's to bridge these 2 legs right here. So it's the same procedure. We're going to drill a couple of holes and use 3-inch screws. Now when you drill these holes into this, we don't want to go straight in like we normally do. There's a good chance we're going to crack this piece of wood or split it. So we're going to start and put our screw in just like that. So right where this lines up, that's where we'll start our hole. And then with the 3-inch screw, we'll send it through, and we shouldn't get any split on our 2x4. And in fact, we didn't. Okay, so just continue screwing this piece on. 2 screws here and 2 screws here. Now we have pre-drilled this piece. It goes on here. This adds to strengthen it for any racking forces, but also it gives us a surface that we can put a weight on in case we have some heavy art hanging on the easel. So it's designed to stick over the edge just 1/8 of an inch and line up at the back. Here we're going to use 1.5 inch screws again. Okay, now we've got our structure more or less built at this point. We have to now start building the apparatus that'll carry the art. So we can put this off to the side for now. Now, working on what will support the artwork, we've made this little piece with the notched out rabbet. So we'll be lining that up on this piece. Now to do that, you want to make sure you put a center line on here and put a center line on here. Once you have those 2 center lines, then you just line it up and put a clamp on it. Okay, that all looks good. Tighten that up just a little bit. Turn it over. And I've already pre-drilled. And we'll use 1.5 inch screws again. Okay, so that is secure. Okay, so now we have our tray section attached to this. I've centered this up where I want it to be. I've pre-drilled 6 holes. We'll be using 1.5 inch screws. So first step is use a square to make sure that we're square. Okay. So the clamp just helps us hold everything square to our stand, and this little piece of ply here just prevents the clamp from making a mark on our finished product. So now we can start putting the screws into this and securing it to the frame. Okay, we are now on pretty much final approach. It's the last little bit of the construction. So what happens is, this is the other side of the support for the art. This holds the art from falling out, and it'll slide up and down to accommodate whatever size we need. In order to do that, this carriage bolt will go through here and be secured to the other side with a large fender washer. So all we need to do is drill a neat hole through here. Now the advantage of a carriage bolt is the carriage bolt has a square bit of tooling right at the top here, and it's designed to wedge itself into a round hole, and that way the bolt won't spin, and you can put the wing nut on it and not worry that this bolt will be spinning on the other side. The second thing I'd like to tell you is that this bolt is 5/16, but I'm actually going to cut the hole at 21/64. And how did I come up with that size? Well, I went to my bit index here and I picked up the bit right here, that's 5/16, and I went one size up, and that's how I sized the bit for this hole. All right, we have a sacrificial piece of wood underneath, and we're going to drill this. Now, of course, if you have access to a drill press, that would be a superior tool for doing this. But I don't, so we'll just try to neatly go straight through. Okay, we are through. So our bolt will set up like that. Once we tighten it, it will just wedge itself in there. Time for a test run. Well, this is the easel that I built for Mrs. Rovers' birthday. And this I'm just demonstrating by putting this little painting of a calf in the easel because it's so small. Because I've previously shown how the easel can accommodate up to 3 feet in height of art, and width is no issue at all. But to show how the small pieces of art fit in between these adjustable clamps. Coincidentally, the painting is of a calf that was born on our previous homestead. Now, the real test is going to be how well does Mrs. Rover like the Mark I easel. The very best way that you can help Rovers Rest is by sharing our videos on your social media. So until next time, thanks for watching.